All right.
Hey, welcome back. Welcome back. I believe my microphone is plugged in.
Yeah.
Okay,
sure
cool.
It's good.
All right. I've only done that once. Yeah, that's a good start. All right. In any event, this is building responsive UI with Bootstrap. Just like it says right there. See, we're starting to get punchy. It's that time of the day.
Yes.
That's John Galloway.
Sure am.
Alongside John Galloway, I am merely Christopher Harrison. And we're rocking and rolling through Bootstrap.
Yes.
And I sort of teased just before we left that we were going to start making a lot of jokes about less being more.
I'm going to try not to.
Okay.
But
can I make a lot of jokes about less being more?
Yes, you sure can.
Excellent.
I'm excited about this session, I got to tell you. So I've done some work with Bootstrap. I've done my basic kind of design stuff. And I had looked at Less. I used Less and demoed Less in Visual Studio before. I hadn't used it with Bootstrap until a few months ago when we started talking about this course. And I've had it on my bookmark list. I got to dig into this. It's awesome. Okay, so I'm completely excited about this class. We're going to talk about Introduction to Less, what it is. We're going to briefly look at some Less workflows, meaning Less is a compiler. It compiles from this kind of meta syntax into CSS. Allows you to do tons of great stuff. Allows you to build custom versions of Bootstrap and just customize the heck out of Bootstrap. But in order to use it, you need to figure out your workflow. I'm going to show you what I think is the simplest in Visual Studio, and then you can go from there.
Perfect.
Given we have 1 hour, I'm going to use the simplest one. And I'm going to show you then what I've done just kind of quick. I got your HTML yesterday.
Yes, you did.
Because we've been working through this and figuring out. And I did not, all I did when you showed me your HTML was I said, that looks cool. Like I didn't give any input on, I need you to move this here or there.
Right.
So, and that was on purpose. I wanted you to give me real world HTML. And it's not even from MVC or anything. It's just real world HTML.
Yep, just
and I wanted to make
HTML.
I wanted to make it semantic using Less.
Perfect.
And I did that. So and then finally we'll wrap up with some kind of more advanced going further sorts of things. So first of all, real quick introduction to Less. Less is a meta syntax for CSS. It gives you variables. Variables are great, so you can define one color up at the top and then use it throughout your CSS, and then if you need to change it, you can change it. You can also say, I would like to use this color, and then I would like it 30% darker or 30% lighter, and you can go through and do all these HSL. You can do all kinds of color functions, just tons of calculations and stuff. So variables and functions, I think as programmers, we're all pretty used to. Mix-ins is a little bit kind of new to us, or to some of us. So the idea is that you can define essentially a function and then call it from within something else. Sorry, not a function. You can define a style. So here in my example, let me go in and try and draw here. So I'm going to go with the highlighter. So here we've got a style. So we've defined a class and an ID, the class of A and an ID of B, and for both of those we've set the color to red. And now I can say I would like to call a mix-in class. So I'm creating a new class, and in here I'm saying just call A. And so that's going to bring in A. So whenever I use .mixin class, it's going to go up here and it's going to get that and it's going to say use color red. And the same here, I can do that. Now here's another little secret, and you'll see when I'm showing this off later. You don't need these parentheses to call mix-ins. It's maybe a little more clear, but if there's no variable that you're passing, if there's no parameters you're passing in, then you don't need that. Okay. So that's kind of the general thing. We will look quickly at the site here. I just want to show you this is the Less site, lesscss.org. And so there's a few of these kind of CSS processors, preprocessors. Another common one is Sass, and the main difference I saw in the beginning was Less was more focused on being able to, you could rename .css to .less and it would still work. Sass originally didn't do that. Sass stood for syntactically awesome style sheets. And then they came out later. over time, there were kind of both had their advantages. Less allowed you to do one thing. Sass allowed you easier calling of mix-ins and some other things.
Okay.
And so what they've both done over time is added in the features that the other had, really. So there's not really, to my way of thinking, there's not a huge amount of difference between the two. I like some things about Sass syntax more. They've got a special syntax called SCSS. Which I don't even know what that is, Sassy CSS or whatever. But that's kind of the CSS variant of Sass. Forget all that business. Basically, less allows you to do things like, if we take a look here, I'm defining a variable, and then I can go in and I can call. I can apply logic to it. I can say I would like a box shadow, and here I'm calling an RGBA function on it, and here I've passed in 50% alpha, and I'm using that there. I can call things like lighten, or I can do calculations on things. Here I'm doing something where I can say dot box shadow. When I call dot box shadow, I actually want you to do both of these things, throw in WebKit box shadow and box shadow, so you can do prefixing and stuff like that. Here we're doing saturation and lightening. So, really some pretty slick stuff. So that's the less code that you write. And then that compiles out to this, right? So this is, this is the actual compiled. This is what is sent to the browser. So what's nice is if I want to change something later, I change one variable and that ripples all the way through. So that's really nice. So there's tons more information here on language features you can dig into. I definitely recommend learning more about mix-ins specifically. Mix-ins, I showed you this example earlier where I can go through and include things. There's also support for nesting. So when you start going into nesting and using mix-ins, you can do quite a bit with it. So I'm not going to dig into more detail. For what we need to do today, this is about all you need to know, is kind of some real high-level stuff. Okay. So that is our 20-second introduction to less.
Okay.
So now let's talk about workflows in Bootstrap. I'm going to start with the hard ways, and I'll show you just enough for you to go like, oh, do I really have to do that? And then we'll go with the simple ways, right? So what you'll find out is, first of all, you can compile using Grunt. And then secondly, I actually have these out of order. You can also set up compilation using ASP.NET bundling. And then thirdly, you can compile within Visual Studio using Web Essentials and Visual Studio support for less, okay? So first, let's take a look at Grunt. So this is what you'll find out when you go to the Bootstrap site. So here I am on the Get Started. I went on the Get Started, and then I've got this compiling CSS and JavaScript. So here, this is going to show you. You can go through and do this walkthrough. It's a little bit more typey than you may be used to as a Windows developer, but it definitely works. So here I've got npm installed, and I've got Grunt and I've got Bower. So this is my command prompt here. So if I say npm, I've got npm on here. I actually installed npm using Chocolatey, which is my favorite way to install this kind of stuff on Windows. That's at chocolatey.org.
Chocolatey.
Again, I'm going through this quickly. I don't actually expect you to do this. I'm just saying in case some people are really into this kind of command line business and want to set that up, maybe want to automate it, here's the pointers where to go. Mm-hmm. Right? So I installed Chocolatey, and then I did cinst npm, and it's going to say you've already got it, which is great. And so then after that, I used npm and I installed Grunt and I installed Bower. So then Bower is a package manager from within npm that you'll use to get stuff. So here I went in and I'm going to escape out of this real quick, and I'll do let me see. Okay, so I'll make a new directory, and we'll call this foo, and then we'll do cd foo, and we'll do Bower install Bootstrap.
And Bower is?
Bower is that package manager. It's a command line package manager that you'll see used with NPM. It is, you can find it, I think it's bower.io. Everything cool these days is .io, so it's bower.io. And this will tell you a little bit more about it. This is a command line installer kind of thing.
Okay.
So there you go, that's what that is. So I did that, and then I go, this tells me that it installed Bootstrap, and then Bootstrap included a dependency of jQuery. Right?
Okay, so it's sort of like NuGet.
Exactly, same kind of thing. This is NPM and node-based, so it's kind of more command line.
Okay.
Okay, so then in here I'm going to say cd bootstrap and cd bower components. Okay. And this shows the distribution, what I've got there. So this has, if I went into dist, this is the CSS, fonts, and JavaScript. This is what I've been using throughout the day inside of Visual Studio, installed via NuGet.
Okay.
Partly showing this so you feel, see how good you've got it as a Visual Studio developer. Because this is the documentation of what they're telling you, how to get things set up, right? Okay, so now I could say, I believe I say, it's like, I don't know how many people play video games, but there's kind of these walkthroughs, and you'll follow the walkthrough when you kind of get to the difficult level. So here, if I've got this installed, and then I can say npm install once I'm in the Bootstrap directory. So I can say npm install, and this is going to use grunt. Grunt is a task runner, a command line task runner, run under npm. And so it's great for a lot of like build things. You can use it for running tests. And it's actually, they're adding more support for it in Visual Studio in the future, which is part of why I'm spending a little bit more time talking about it than I normally would. So then once I've finally done with that, then I can go in and I can say things like, I could just type grunt and it'll run all the tests, or I could say grunt dist and it's just going to compile. And so this is running a compiler that will, whatever my less files are, then it'll compile that out. So I could say grunt, and this is actually grunt, yes. And this is actually kind of pretty. It's going to go through, and I think it shows that it built everything for me.
Okay, so this built your CSS files?
This built those CSS files.
Okay, from the less file.
Yeah, so what this means is, I'm showing you this for two reasons. One, if you want to go in and start building out, you want to set up a workflow that works like this, you're going to see a lot of documentation if you just dig around in the Bootstrap world. People will say, yeah, edit your grunt, do this and that, and so you're welcome to do that. Also, if you want your less files, you can just download a zip of them off the site, or you can get them this way.
Okay.
Okay, so these are the less files. Now here's a little bit of a mind blower. They actually write Bootstrap in less. Everything is built using less.
Okay.
And so all the source code, if you go out onto GitHub and you look up the source for Bootstrap, so GitHub Bootstrap, you'll see that it's actually all the source code is in less, and that's just how they build it. Okay, so which actually makes a lot of sense because they do things like define variables. Okay, so here are, for instance, all those colors that we talk about. Things like, those kind of base colors. Yep. Brand primary, brand success. Those are all based here. And then you'll see things like they're using things like lighten, right? So this is where they're defining stuff. And then also you'll see things like typography sizes. These are all calculated. So this starts to make a lot more sense. These aren't just, wild hackers whacking away on CSS. This is actually a pretty well-designed system, and they do run builds on it to put everything together.
Okay.
You definitely see that when you start digging into things like the grid. Okay, so a little bit of taking you through the ringer a little bit, but I do want to show you how the sausage is made. A small amount. So that is how they build it, and this is how you can get total control of your Bootstrap. Okay, now let's dig into, if you want to, you're probably not going to do this. You're probably going to go in and write some less files, and then you need to compile them out. One other way you can do that is compiling using bundling. So there are several different bundle transformers already written.
Okay.
So you can do, install package using NuGet. You can install this bundle transformer, and then when you write less files, that's automatically compiled to CSS as well.
Okay. Now, I'm just going to sort of, while we have this here, and it seems like a natural breaking point,
yes.
We'll give you an opportunity to get a sip there. Somebody asked a question, what problem does less solve? And this was something that you touched on at the very beginning, which is when you start going in and utilizing Bootstrap very heavily, you notice that you get class after class after class after class entered into your file. And that can just take up a lot of space. And also, as we saw, there's just a lot of classes to have to deal with. And trying to go in and modify all of those can be a challenge. So that's what less is there to help solve.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, I had some different blog posts. There was one where somebody did just this beautiful example where they showed, here's how we used to write HTML in the year 2000. And it was a lot of font tags and a lot of inline styles and a lot, you know what I mean? And it was just, that's how we did it. And then we realized that was kind of a mess, and we wanted to start moving all that layout and design into a CSS.
Okay.
And so that is really the problem we're trying to solve here. And actually, that's a great kind of segue back into this. So we want to get to semantic markup. We want nice markup. So here's the problem. What we want is this up at the top. We want to do this. We want to say new album.
Right.
And somebody looking at our HTML doesn't need to know, hey, that's a bunch of Bootstrap in it, right? And we can move things around, and we can write, sane, clean, readable HTML.
Yep.
But with Bootstrap, in order to get things to look nice, we end up with all this junk. Okay? Serves a real purpose, but it doesn't really belong in HTML. And the right kind of division of labor is HTML is the content and CSS is the presentation. And
right.
we want to keep that presentation specifics out of our content.
Absolutely.
Okay, so how do we get there? And here's where we can put all those pieces together, and we can say, all right, we know that that Bootstrap is built using less, and so they compile things down. They also, as part of doing that, they include a lot of mix-ins. So we can go in and we can say, I would like to, when I say, I want to be able to write this HTML, and then I can go in and using less, I can say, I can define all of these Bootstrap classes.
Right.
And so I can, here now I've got the right kind of separation. I'm using less, which is my presentation, and then my HTML is my content, and I'm able to move all those Bootstrap classes into less and out of my HTML.
Okay.
So you'll see for a lot of these, the mix-ins that you'll be using they look exactly like the classes that you would have used before.
Okay.
The ones that are kind of different are some of these utilities where you need to pass in these variables. So I need to say, I want to use, small column 3, medium 4, large 6, right? So that's where you go in and you do kind of use this mix-in syntax. All right, so here's the big fun. Here's what you've been sticking around for, is let's see it in action, okay? So here I've gone in, and I'll step back a second. I'll show kind of where I started with. So I grabbed your album details, and actually, let me see. Yeah, that's going to work. So I grabbed your album details, and here it all is, right? So I just grabbed that HTML. And then I did File New Project MVC, and I threw it into the home view.
Okay.
And then I also made the beginnings of moving this into full MVC application. So I've got here an album class and a track class. So my album includes a list of tracks. And then I scaffolded this out. So I went in and scaffolded out this view. And so here's my view. Okay, and so my back end as well. So let's look at that controller. So here in the home controller, this is, of course, normally you'd be passing in an ID. This would be details for each different one. But so I'm calling, get album and then returning that as my view. And this is really a view model here. This album is because it's kind of rolling up a few different things. All right. So there's that. So now let's take a look at our front end code and see how we did with that. Any good questions you see coming in yet? Or?
No, so far everything's, you've actually answered most everything. So
Okay.
we're still kind of plugging along here very well.
Cool. Okay, so let's look at, kind of the workflow steps that I did here. So I went in and I renamed my .css file. I named it to .less.
Okay.
And it was immediately, when I did that, it was valid less. Now, so there's some steps here, but so all this stuff up here, this is just standard CSS.
Nothing fancy.
That was in my original, So, but when I renamed it to site.less, then every time I save it, it goes through and it actually compiles it over onto the right here.
Oh, okay.
So
you just show me how you open that back up again.
Okay, so this actually, right when I created it, it was split screen like this.
Oh, okay. All right.
This is Visual Studio support, but it's I moved it over here just so I could.
I gotcha.
Okay. And
Okay.
also for the big reveal, right?
Hey, yeah.
Okay.
So over on the left is all of your less. Visual Studio is creating all of the appropriate CSS for you.
Mm-hmm. So it's compiling that in. So, and you'll see here changes the order of things, all that kind of stuff. So then what I did was I created this Bootstrap folder inside my application, and I grabbed a bunch of mix-ins and components and things that I wanted to use. So I just started grabbing these and throwing them in.
Okay.
So I said, here I've got forms and I've got grid and I've got this and that, and just kind of move them all in there.
Yep.
Then let me see. And honestly, a good amount of this is trial and error. Like I said, okay, I know I need, the main ones you'll need is variables. You'll almost always need grid, utilities, and mix-ins. And then I would go in and I would say, well, I'm trying to use a button and it's saying mix-in not found. So
Right.
I guess I need to include that one.
Okay.
So they're pretty obviously named for the most part. So here, I'm going to show you a little trick here. If I go in here and I say explorer dot, this is kind of a neat trick. If you say explorer dot, that's going to open up Explorer in that same folder. Didn't know if you knew that. And then just to kind of go backwards, you can say cmd dot, and that'll open up a command prompt there. So if you need to hop back and forth between. So here all these are, and I just did the old drag and drop right into Visual Studio.
Okay.
So
By the way, since you're back in Visual Studio, if you don't mind my asking, IntelliSense support.
Yeah, IntelliSense support is actually really good. So I can go in and I can start, like as I went in and started typing things, I can say, all this stuff. I can say import. I can say, as I'm in here editing. So here, like I did, if I say dot make.
Oh, okay, yeah, perfect.
So here I said make MD column, or I can say MD poll, and then make that 10.
Now, that's very cool. There's actually two little things that I want to highlight here. Number one, up towards the top on the nav section, somebody had asked in particular actually about the nav and the fact that you need like 5 different things set up on the nav to get that all to work.
Absolutely. I want
You
to
now
show
have all of that combined in one shot there.
Yeah.
Just nav is now, nav bar inverse, fixed top, and then it's also flagged as a container.
Yep. And I'm going to show that navbar section off a little bit more in a section.
Okay.
In a second. So first I'm starting with your HTML, but I'm so glad you pointed that out because I would have forgotten it otherwise. So we're going to start with me converting your HTML, and then I'll show you me converting file new project MVC over as well also.
Perfect. Okay.
With the layout and
Did
all
you
that.
do anything special to Visual Studio here?
Nothing.
Nothing fancy.
No, this
is right out of the box.
Built in.
So if I was to run down to fill in local store here, pick up a shrink wrap copy of Visual Studio.
Yep.
Could you actually find a shrink wrapped copy of?
Maybe on, like
How many
Microsoft
floppies
Store
would
and
that be
something
on?
like that. No,
Yeah.
that's interesting. I don't
But anyway, okay, fantastic. So this is just right there.
Just to really point out what you're saying, right-click, add new item, less style sheet, start typing.
Just okay.
And you can copy and paste content off of that lesscss.org. So even if you're
Fantastic.
doing nothing with Bootstrap, less is really actually pretty fantastic.
So less is more.
Oh, you did it. Now you did it. Okay, so here's what I wanted to do. I've got your HTML, which is, it's functional. It does what you need to do in order to, get Bootstrap working. You may want to start with this, actually. You may want to start just building out, get all your classes, and get all this stuff working, because it's not that hard to change it. But there's some problems with it. One problem.
Hey, my code, man. There's
Okay.
some problems with it.
Well, so one thing is we've got all these classes everywhere. Another is there's a lot of div, which is all right, but they call this divitis, where you've got a lot of div tags when what you really want is, you want the HTML5 semantic markup tags.
Right.
So I went through and kind of worked top to bottom, and I tried to use sections and articles where possible. The idea is a section is kind of a grouping on a page, and then within that you can have multiple articles. And you would think of an article as something that you might possibly, like if it might fit in an RSS feed or something, if you might have several of them and it would make sense, then that's considered an article. So I got rid of almost all the divs out of here. And again, it's not because I hate divs, it's just this is a little bit easier to read if I've got, okay, this is obviously an article. So then working...
You hate divs and you know it.
I'm not a fan of divs. Okay, so here I'm going to go in and let's put these side by side. All right, so here I'm going to go there and there. And I think that's going to work for me. Okay. And I'm going to close, just trust me that it compiles to CSS, but you don't need to see exactly how. So then working through top to bottom, I say, okay, I had this. So let's look at that main with the banner area. So the album details area. So if I go up there, I've got div class equals container body content. So I said I would rather call, so that's this.
Okay.
And I said instead I want to call that a section with an ID or a class of main.
Okay.
Really, I could have called it idea main. That might have made more sense. But so that's my container. So then I just go in here, and these are actually mix-ins. And this is cool. So when I hover over these, I've got to zoom on this, Visual Studio is showing me what that mix-in is generating.
Oh.
It's pretty darn awesome.
How
right?
cool.
So this is saying, okay, container actually calls container fixed and then has some media queries in there.
Now, if I wanted to go back and keep using command line and grunt, I could?
You could.
Okay. Not that I want to, but I could.
You sure could. Yep, knock yourself out. Okay, so that's how I work top to bottom here. So I said, I want to, so I looked at this, and then I said, I also, while I was at it, I went in and I added in a class of main, right? And then I added those additional ones, and then I changed this. So I called this a section, section main, and then later on down I've got a section of banner. So let's look at that one, section banner. So banner was a Jumbotron before.
Okay.
So div class equals Jumbotron. And this, you can ignore this, this actually isn't needed here, but in order to support an A tag inside of a Jumbotron, I needed those mix in. So they're exactly the same as the class that I would assign, that Bootstrap class. Mm-hmm. It's just it's just showing it, with that, these are using mix-ins instead to generate those classes, all right?
Now, just as, there was a question in here. Oh, sorry, this is a slight tangent. Somebody actually did the math. It would take 2,035 floppy disks for Visual Studio.
Wow. Okay. All right. I'll stop by the store.
Yep.
Okay. So we started simple here. This is, we set up the container, and then we set up this Jumbotron area at the top. So now let's get a little bit more tricky. We want to set up this area, and this is using a lot of the grid stuff, right? So I would prefer to call this something like, I believe I called this section album overview. Okay, so you can see I've mapped these over, all these classes. I said, first of all, I need my album overview. I'm going to rename this here. I'm going to rename this div to an article and give it a class of album overview. And then I need it to be a row. And that's actually all I need this div to have is class row. All right. So I just use this mix in, I said article album overview and gave it class a row.
Okay, so you just said, so I want you to have a row, and then underneath there I want you to have an image, and underneath there I want you to have a div.
Yeah, so here I'm taking advantage of a feature in Less that allows for nested selectors.
Okay.
This is really cool. So instead of, like, normally if you want to take advantage of cascading in CSS, you have to write these long selectors, and you have to say article.albumOverview, and you write a class for that, and you say album.albumOverview image, and you write stuff for that.
Okay.
Album overview div, and so nesting stuff is a pain in the neck. With Less, you just nest the rules inside each other, and it will compile it out for you. So now let's look at, we've got a row, and now I want to get this image set up. So here, my image class needs a bunch of this stuff. It needs these hidden XS and make column 2 and all that. So here I said I want this column, a medium column 2, so I just use this mix-in. And then it's same thing here, hidden, small, blah, blah, blah.
Okay.
And then one more here.
So you really are just going in and simplifying everything that I did there.
Top to bottom, yep.
Wow.
And so all I'm doing is calling these mix-ins, right? So there's my less. My less is actually pretty darn readable. It's controlling all that style. And so once I'd done that, then I could go in and I could say, here's my album details. Wait.
Album overview.
Album overview, thank you. So this is my album overview. You'll notice there's only, well, there is this one class. I was actually, if I'd had time, I was going to use a gradient because there's actually all these cool things, you know, that you can do. But so, by the way, this is a nice little feature of Visual Studio. A lot of people don't know. Mouse over for image preview. Okay, so here I set an article. I gave it a class. And then everything inside of here, all those Bootstrap classes are applied via Less. So that all cascades down.
Nice.
Are people following along? Any
yeah, actually, people are following along. I'm keeping an eye on everything, and yeah.
Cool.
And I would also just kind of mention just one more time here, just to reiterate it, because it's just that cool. Can you? This is going to get really tricky if I ask you to do this.
Side by side of these two.
Side by side of those two.
I think that's a great idea. So here's what I want to do. And then I'll just move this guy back into here.
There you go. That's perfect.
This is like shuffling the cups around. I did the wrong one, didn't I?
That's all right.
And now I'll go there.
All right. Later on, we'll be doing the cups and balls trick.
Yes.
Okay. So over on the left side, that's the album overview section that you just created using Less. Over on the right side was what I just had. And so rather than having class equals row, class equals column D2, hidden XS, hidden SM, column D10, all that you had to say was album overview, Bob's your uncle.
Yeah. Here's one where it's even a lot more obvious. Let's take a look at this one. These are the track listings, right? So here's that track listing left and right. And again, given just a slight amount more time, I was about to change this to using a UL instead of divs, which really wouldn't be hard to do. There's a class for a UL unstyled.
Nice.
So notice, and here I did decide I do want to use H3 and then give it a class name that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so I've given these different things. Here's an article, class of tracks, and that kind of thing. But which one would you rather have? You know, that one on the right is it's functional, but that's not beautiful. You know, and it's not hard to edit, or it's difficult to edit.
Right.
It's also the control is in the wrong place because in order to change how the page is looking, in order to change the display, I'm hacking around in HTML.
Right.
Those really should be, a content-focused person who doesn't know how to code should be able to get into my HTML and make some simple content edits. And I really wouldn't trust, a content-focused person to go in and edit this HTML. This is code here.
But being able to just go in and simply say class is track, class is title, class duration, that they're now just flagging, hey, this is what the data is, and then it's up to CSS to figure out how it wants to display the data.
Exactly.
Perfect.
Yep. Now here's one other thing people had asked about MVC earlier, and I did convert a couple of these things over. I didn't convert everything over. Partly this is a little bit more easy to compare left and right this way. But this is just HTML display 4, and it's just writing the content out.
Okay.
So this is the same either way, and this is, if you want to learn more about MVC, you know, you can watch our previous Jumpstart. This is also the exact same thing. Be incredibly simple to do a web form as well and use this exact same markup, right?
Awesome.
So
The biggest comment so far has been the HTML is so much cleaner.
it really is. I mean, so let's look down here for this expert review. Same kind of thing. Look, it's readable, and it's not something I'm going to be embarrassed of. Right? so I really, I'll be honest.
It's some HTML and CSS you can take home to your parents.
Exactly. So that was my main hang-up. I know people have two kind of hang-ups with Bootstrap in general. One is that a lot of Bootstrap sites look the same, and we're going to talk about that in the next session. But the other big problem I had was I don't want my HTML to control my design, and this is every single time I typed one of those classes in, I just felt dirty because I had made that painful transition from embed everything in your HTML, move it over to CSS, and I didn't want to go back to that, right? So I'm really, I just have to say, this is something you can ramp up on very quickly. There's a lot of good articles out there, and I'll point them out in a few minutes. This is something that is important to get, is this whole nesting thing. So this is not something you'll be used to with CSS, is that you can go in, you can say, here's my section. Now I'm calling a mixin on that section. Now I'm saying apply these styles to an article with a class of tracks that is inside a section with album details. You know what I mean? So this is a nested rule set. And then for all of these, I'm saying make a column, make this. Now within article tracks, everything that is...
Every time we find a track, make a new row.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Perfect.
So, I mean, you do just kind of build it up. I think a good way to learn it is the way I did, is just kind of taking pages and converting top to bottom.
Yep.
So, I want to show...
That makes a lot of sense. Just start from something you've got and away you go from there.
Yep. So, and, I mean, hopefully you'd believe me that it all does work. Let me show the example here. The reason I'm getting those pop-ups, I really should have moved it. But, so... There, this is the exact same display. This is everything that you had before, and be very easy now because it's in MVC to move it so that it's iterating out, writing multiple tracks and all that. So there's kind of my main example. I also did want to show one other one, which is this. I have two kind of semantic Bootstrap ones. So the other example that I did was I took File New Project, and I wanted to convert the navigation at the top. And so this is kind of the layout. I wanted to convert the layout so that it works with less as well.
Okay.
So, and I didn't really show that before. So this is stuff like, if we go into the layout, I wanted my layout to look, I wanted to get rid of all these kinds of classes, right? So all this class, navbar, navbar header, navbar this, navbar that. And so the way to do that is again, that whole thing work top to bottom. And there I've got, if I go in here and I look at my site less, I've set these classes here. So then, people asked earlier, why do I have div class equals nav? And this allows me to go in and I can just set my entire, so instead of having navbar, this, that, I can go in and I can change my layout and I can say, here, I've just got a nav.
Right.
Right. So, and then that nav then is pulling in all of that stuff. Here's one selector you may not be as familiar with. This is a descendant selector. So I'm saying I want a div that's a child of this nav to an assigned container to it. So, and this, here I went through and I said I want my Jumbotron. This is kind of nice. I didn't want to say div class equals banner. Or excuse me, I didn't want to have div class equals Jumbotron.
You just don't like jumbotrons.
Yep, sorry, I have to do package restore in order for this to be happy and all the squiggles to go away. So here, I went into my index view. And again, I wanted to move to sections and articles and that kind of thing. So this is my jumbotron up here. And so I said, you know, when I've got class equals announcement and excuse me, this is my jumbotron. So section banner. So not a huge difference, but it's readable. It's nice.
Yeah, it's cleaner.
Yep. One other thing that some people pointed out is, you know, the name of Twitter Bootstrap is Bootstrap, and it's a great system, but it is in some ways designed to get you started quickly.
Right.
And you may, after a while, you may decide, you know, it's time for us to move off of Bootstrap for whatever reason and have our own custom system that's, you know, roughly based on Bootstrap but different. And so you don't want to have all your HTML directly dependent on Bootstrap. It's really nice to have this clean HTML that I could pass it to a designer anywhere and they can do some great work with it. So that's kind of the main thing that you know we're talking about there.
Fantastic.
There's a few advanced applications. I just want to quickly point those out, and we're not going to dig into using them really at all. But I do want to show you. First of all, there are those variables, and those variables are really cool. So this is, let's go over here. Okay, so if I go into...
How many tabs do you have open?
And this is bad. This was a new IE instance this morning. So I believe, you know, tabs are free. If they charge me a nickel for every tab, I'd probably have quite a few fewer. Okay, so we have all kinds of variables available. And these are what Bootstrap uses internally. But what's cool is I can also use these. So these include things like, you know, typography, the entire grid system, components, tables, blah, 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 blah. So I can go in and start using all these as well in my own. So I can say I would like something to be, you know, I can say I would like something to be gray lighter or brand primary, right? And so let's go in and we can in my less, I could say I would like, you know, I would like to start setting, you know, body background color, you know, so I can say color. And then I can paste this in. And you'll see, this is beautiful. There already, I didn't even need to copy and paste it because all these variables are included for me, right? So these are all those Bootstrap variables because I've got that included. So now I'm going to say I would like this to be, you know, my text, my main text, and there's some gray in here, which should be, but I'm just going to say I would like to use the, you know, info text, right? So there, that's all I need to do to take advantage of that. And, you know, now my body color is set to that color, which is maybe not the wisest. But so there's that. So variables that you can take advantage of throughout your less, and they're based on, so there I just changed all my, you know, body color based on one of those variables, right?
Nice.
So we've decided that is a bad idea, and we're going to take that out. And so I'm going to go in here and... right, and then and we're back to, you know, sanity. Okay, so variables available, there are tons of them. There are also vendor mix-ins, and these I'm going to recommend you probably don't want to use. And the reason I'm going to recommend that is because Bootstrap also recommends you don't use them. And so there are a lot of them in here that are available for, I think that's actually back on the other one. But those vendor mix-ins are for, like, if you want to include WebKit specific, or, you know, if you want to include different specific, you know, so if I want to say I want to use Mozilla and WebKit and everything, well, this was a terrible time that we've pretty much moved away from. for a while, every
Oh,
browser
gosh.
was using their own -WebKit, -Moz. You'd see -MS. It
yeah.
was terrible. And so we've all decided that's a bad idea. We're moving away from it. But in order to support older browsers,
Rounded corners.
yeah, exactly. Wasn't this wonderful? So there are mix-ins available. Most of these vendor mix-ins, you're going to say these are deprecated because there's actually an auto prefixer in Bootstrap that will include those all for you.
Okay.
So that is nice. And someday that will all be just a terrible memory. Finally, we have
Something else that we can tell our kids about. When I was your age.
Finally, we have some utility mix-ins, and these are actually pretty useful. So these are things like clear fix, horizontal centering. Horizontal centering is just a pain in the neck sometimes.
And by sometimes you mean all the time.
Always. People are like, you can do all kinds of stuff with CSS and HTML5. Can I center some content? No, you cannot do that. And then also mix-ins for things like sizing, resizable text areas. Here's a great one, truncating text with an ellipsis at the end. All that kind of stuff. So these are mix-ins, again, that are incredibly easy. So I can just say, dot resizable, or here truncating text, I can say text overflow, and that's all I need to do, right? So this is text overflow. I could go in and I could say, I could go into one of these and I could say on my Jumbotron, I could say dot text. Okay, so lucky me, I did have that mix-in defined. If it didn't work, it would be because I didn't have the right imports there. So that's kind of what you want to do, is if it's not working. I'll be honest, just for people that are doing this, if it doesn't work, it's not going to tell you which import you need. And a lot of the time, I would just search Bootstrap less and then the name of that import, and I would get a hit.
Well, there you go.
It would be either somebody saying it doesn't work and somebody saying here's how to do it.
So Stack Overflow entry.
Exactly. Or it would be in the actual source code, and it would just link me to it on GitHub. All right, so we're not going to do that. So what you've seen there really is using less allows you to move from that, get all this stuff out of your HTML and move it into less, and kind of keep your HTML sane and clean, and keep your design and your layout in your CSS.
Perfect. So your HTML just has that single class.
Yeah.
And that's all you need, and away you go from there.
And honestly, in a lot of cases, you don't even need any. We had that one example I believe I have in here where I've just got nav, for instance. Mm-hmm. And I said, okay, if it's nav, that's all I need to know.
And go. Engage.
Yep, exactly. And so then on my nav, I said, all right, if you're nav, do all the Bootstrap nav stuff.
Fantastic. So, all right. Well, I guess less is more.
All right, let's take a break. I'm going to cry for a little bit, and then we'll get back to less in the real world. Or excuse me, Bootstrap
in the real world. All right. We'll see you guys in 10 minutes.